From Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service and the Associated Press, this is the GOP Presidential Candidates Conversations on National Security and Foreign Policy, with questions from students across the United States at the University of New Hampshire, at Iowa State University, at Clemson University in South Carolina, and at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And now, live, here is Georgetown's Mo Alifi and the AP's Anna Johnson.
Candidate Conversations with 2024 Republican presidential candidates talking about national security and foreign policy. As we have seen over the past week, this is clearly national security and foreign policy issues are clearly going to be amongst the most important issues that the next commander-in-chief deals with. And so we wanted to have an opportunity for young people, for students, to engage directly with the candidates to talk about their visions on America's standing in the world. And we could not have a better partner in hosting these than the Associated Press, one of the premier media organizations in the world with one of the widest reaches in the world. Anna, thank you so much for partnering with us.
Well, thank you so much, Mo, and thank you for having us here. We're really, we're looking forward to the discussion tonight as part of the second installment in our series here at Georgetown. It's really part of our commitment at the Associated Press to fact-based, nonpartisan journalism and to the coverage of the most important issues around the world. As you might expect, tonight, many of the questions are going to be focusing on the war between Israel and Hamas. We're also looking forward to the questions from all of you, from the students here at Georgetown. I have to say, when we were here last time, I was really impressed with all of the questions that you all asked. We'll also be hearing from students at Clemson University and the University of New Hampshire. They're not going to be joining us live tonight, but they've submitted questions in advance via video.
Every single Republican presidential candidate who was invited to participate in the first primary debate has been invited to participate in this series. Tonight we're fortunate to have the second candidate conversation. Look, as we've seen over the past week, particularly in Israel and Gaza, conversations around these issues are tough, they're hard, they're emotional, but they are so important. They're important for all of you to have a chance to question those who want to lead us moving forward. As I said last time we all gathered, we're not here tonight to give this candidate a platform. We're here to give you a platform, to ask whatever questions you want to ask. Do so in a way that is tough, that is fair, and that is respectful, but it's an opportunity for you to hold them accountable. And so, to that end, let's get the conversation started. I want to introduce Michael Emerson, a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences and president of Georgetown College Republicans, who is going to introduce the candidate and our moderator tonight. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mo. Hi, everybody. My name is Michael Emerson. I'm a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences, majoring in government, and like Mo said, I'm also the president of Georgetown University College Republicans. We are at a critical juncture in our global order right now. And as we are all witnessing in the Middle East, Ukraine, and Taiwan, we are very fortunate to be joined tonight by a man who has seen it all and done it all in situations that require strength on the international front, as well as dialogue and listening to get things done at home. Our guest tonight stands as an example for all of us on how to defend our convictions while extending a hand of unity to our political competitors. He is a happy warrior, and he believes that he will be the best next leader of the United States. Most of all, he believes that America can provide for anyone what she has provided for him. Tim Scott has served as the United States Senator from South Carolina since 2013 and is currently a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Prior to his career in the Senate, Senator Scott served in the South Carolina House of Representatives and in the U.S. House of Representatives. In 2016, he became the first African-American senator to be elected from the Southern United States since the Reconstruction era. The senator will take your questions in a discussion moderated by Meg Kennard, who is a Georgetown alumna and Associated Press reporter. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Senator Tim Scott and Meg Kennard from AP.
Good to see you.
As well.
Thank you for joining us
Absolutely.
for this conversation, part of AP's collaboration with Georgetown University. As an alum, it's always great for me to be back on the hilltop, and I'm really glad to have this conversation continue. Senator, as was mentioned in the intro, clearly heavy on the minds of many is the war ongoing in Israel with Hamas. It's a worsening situation. There are concerns that this conflict could spread. Obviously, humanitarian concerns as well on the ground continue to worsen. We've seen Defense Secretary Austin, Secretary of State Blinken visiting the region, still there, and there's a possibility that the president may be making a trip as well. Do you think that these are the right actions for the heads of U.S. government to be making at this time? And if you were president, what would you say to Prime Minister Netanyahu in such a visit?
Yeah, certainly one of the things that we should do is remember Psalms 122:6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and those who do will prosper. There's no doubt that America should stand shoulder to shoulder, back to back, with no daylight with Israel. The devastation that we saw last Saturday is hard to imagine, and it carried on for so many days. I think about the fact that when you see over 1,200 Israelis, Jews lose their lives, not since Yom Kippur have we seen this kind of devastation. To put it in American terms, we would be talking about 40,000 dead Americans had that attack happened at home. And so the question I ask myself is, as Commander-in-Chief, what kind of response would we have if that were America? And that's the kind of response we should provide to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The first thing I said last Saturday was moving the Sixth Fleet into the Mediterranean was the right decision to make. Second thing is put more firepower in close proximity so that we can be responsive. Third thing I've said is to make sure that our special operation forces are prepared to help rescue hostages, American hostages. We should make sure that Prime Minister always has the resources he needs. The good news, Meg, is that over the last 10 years or so, we've provided Israel with about $35+ billion. Part of the technological marvel of the Middle East is the Iron Dome missile defense system. We participated, collaborated with them. They were able to get it done faster because they have less red tape to go through because they live in a fairly dangerous neighborhood, a very dangerous neighborhood. So seeing those kind of resources helps me understand what we need to continue to do. I had the opportunity this week to sit down with Ambassador Herzog from Israel. And one of the things he echoed to me was the same thing we've heard from the Prime Minister, is that they have the resources, the capability, and the manpower, calling up 360,000 reservists to wipe Hamas off the face of the earth. And we talked about the definition of proportional. When you see the kind of devastation brought upon his nation, the one thing that the ambassador was clear about was that the definition of proportional is to make sure that Hamas is wiped out so that they cannot do this again. I would make sure that, number one, just to reinforce it, that Israel continues to have the resources that they've had. Number two, that the collaboration and the partnership that's existed for the last, really, longer than 10 years, but deep investments in the last 10 to 15 years would continue. Number three, that we're in a position to backfill as they just use all the resources that they have, the weapons, the technology, the backfilling, the replenishing of that will be a really important part of the strategy that we see going forward. So I'd make sure that we were there.
Along with that, the U.S. has been talking about expediting orders, already existing orders, not new orders from Israel, in terms of providing pieces of that Iron Dome defense. I assume, given what you said, that you would support that kind of idea as well.
Absolutely. One of the things I've said is that $3.5 to $3.8 billion that we give to Israel on an annual basis right now should be higher. I thought that before this conflict. I certainly think it now, for sure. One of the things that we have to recognize is that the partnership does not only help Israel, that some of the technological revolutions that we enjoy as Americans come from Tel Aviv, comes from Israel. So the partnership continues to benefit our military, and the best thing that we can do is make sure that we keep that partnership as tight as possible. But in the midst of the conflict, in the midst of a war, you want to make sure that all the resources that they have, all the resources that they need are in their hands, and that they have the kind of flexibility that they need to exact what I would consider as a proportional response. Final thing I would say as President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, I'd make sure that when you think about the state of affairs, they're going into Gaza. There's a northern border.
Well, I'm glad you're mentioning that, because that was going to be my next question. What is your concern level about this becoming more of a regional conflict in terms of drawing in Iran via Hezbollah?
Yeah, listen, I think we've already seen Iran drawn in through Hamas. 90% of the funds that come into Hamas comes from Iran. It's one of the reasons why I've been apoplectic about this administration's initial reactions to the invasion and the start of the war, which was to tell Israel to refrain from responding. That was then deleted on Saturday, but that kind of response is the type of response that invites more conflict.
Well, and to be fair, President Biden and other members of the administration have strongly condemned the attack and said
absolutely.
Lots of strong language to the effect of, this was not something that was
totally agree with you.
Could be supported.
But to be fair, their first reaction was, without question, to tell Israel to refrain from responding. That is the worst decision you make when you've seen the kind of devastation and death around the nation of Israel. So the first thing I've said is President Biden's weakness invites attacks. The negotiations, I'm sure we'll get to the negotiations on hostages of $6 billion, actually helped fund the attacks. And frankly, that first response that I just talked about, telling Israel to stand down, is the worst decision.
Well, since you brought in the administration's initial response, I think this is a good place to go. I'm looking because I want to make sure I quote you here. You blamed President Biden for a pattern of foolish policy choices that have undermined us and our allies, and said that he has blood on his hands.
Yes.
President Biden remains popular in Israel, so I want to hear in your words, what did you mean by that?
I'd recommend that you read the Jewish Times when you have an opportunity to do so, because one of the things that's been in recent news just in the last 24 hours is Israel's concern that President Biden's comments, especially about occupation, is a distraction from the kind of support that they need. They want us standing shoulder to shoulder. So what I would say is that, without any question, I'm glad that he finally got there. But my comments still remain, and the evidence is by looking in the rearview mirror. And we could go back to 2 years ago in the Afghanistan terrible withdrawal that left 13 Americans dead. We can go forward and say that when President Biden said to Putin, if you just don't cyber attack these areas, it might be okay. And then the third thing we would go to is when he said that a small incursion into Ukraine could be, not so bad. The fact of the matter is, when you see that kind of pattern of weakness, it only attracts more conflict. And the one thing that I remember, is not a great quote, but it's a paraphrase, I can't get it exactly right, from Ronald Reagan, was Ronald Reagan said that out of the 4 wars in my lifetime, none of them were fought because America was too strong. Weakness from the American presidency actually attracts conflict around the world. And it's one of the reasons why I've said to be prepared in the world that we're living in, the world that's volatile, fractured, and frankly violent. We have to be prepared to deal with 3 conflicts on 3 different continents, not even including our own back door, in order for us to be prepared for global leadership. How some of those conflicts interact and intermingle, I want to talk about in a little bit, but first I want to talk about Gaza, where the situation is dire and is getting worse and worse from all the coverage that we've all seen. Water's run out, Israel's cut off access to certain resources, food, medicine. There have been constant bombardment by Israel, but there remain a lot of people who are in harm's way. At what point do you look at that as president and intervene? What kind of humanitarian corridor should be set up? And has the U.S. gone far enough to encourage Israel to abide by rules of war in this kind of situation? Well, one of the things that we should ask ourselves is, what's the mirror picture of the rules of war, and how did Hamas abide by those rules of war. And one of the things that you would think about is the first rule of war from an international standard talks about the importance of distinction. They want to make sure that you're able to distinguish between combatants and civilians. When you see the attack within Israel, there's one thing that's completely clear, that there was no distinction, there was no desire to look for. The second thing that you talk about is a military strategy. This was not a military strategy from Hamas. It was a strategy that targeted the most feeble, the weak, the elderly, the children, in a democracy. What they did was not ignore any international norms of law of war as if they're as if they're always applied. What they actually did was act as if there was nothing about it at all. This is an Old Testament absolute evisceration of a group of people with an objective, according to Hamas's philosophy, of eliminating Israel. Part two, eliminating all the Jews on earth, which 6 million live in America. Part three is to attack Western democracy. So when you think about the international rules, they completely ignore them all. And so let's take a look at Israel's reaction to the situation. Going back to the concept of distinction. One of the first things that Israel has done is they waited. Now, how Prime Minister Netanyahu had the kind of restraint, the refrain from immediate action, it just talks about the morality and the humanity that we see coming from Netanyahu into the Gaza. What we see there is a bit of patience with a warning to everyone in Gaza: leave, go out of harm's way. We're going to give you time to do so, even though the time was not granted to us. We're going to give you something while we bury our loved ones, while we look at the pictures of beheaded children that happened to be ours, while we look at the bodies that were burned, babies that happened to be ours, while our grandmothers were murdered in front of their families and our daughters were raped. We're going to show restraint in spite of what you see. We're going to show the kind of restraint that was not afforded to us. But in addition to that, before we go in, we're going to tell you what we're going to do. It's going to be a complete siege. So the best thing for you to do is to leave. And what did we see Hamas's reaction? As Israel saying leave, Hamas, who builds headquarters near schools and tunnels under hospitals, they say to the Palestinians, stay. Well, why? Because Hamas cares more about having human shields to slow down the reaction and the response of Israel than they do about the Palestinian lives.
But what about let's think about the people who remain. Should the U.S. play a role in trying to get out some of those citizens or other hostages who couldn't take that opportunity to get out?
Well, I certainly think that there should be an international opportunity for many players to play a role in that. We certainly have had many conversations with Egypt, and I'm thankful that as I read through the papers in Israel and here at home, it seems like the Egyptians have provided a route, and thankfully that they have, because initially they didn't. And so having that relationship, even though it's sometimes volatile, is an important part of the consideration that you've seen from us. But I'd also say that there are other players in the region that have played a significant role in funding Hamas, that play a significant role in fostering and feeding terrorism. They could play a role. I mean, you can see some of these refugees, some of these people that have no place to go to Iran.
Speaking of some of that funding and support, last week you proposed that the Senate Banking Committee, on which you sit as ranking member, take a look at that $6 billion in funding that you mentioned. Hamas has acknowledged that Iran did play a role in some of the planning for what happened recently in Israel. But that money has been refrozen and it's not able to be accessed. So why is something like your proposal the right thing to do right now while the situation on the ground is still developing?
Well, one of the things that we know, thankfully when I said freeze the assets, because money is fungible, therefore you can use it for any means that you want to the administration dilly-dallied and they did nothing. And then after so much pressure, so much heat from both sides of the aisle, they decided, wait a second, maybe we should try to freeze those assets. What they ultimately did was not freeze the assets. They had a quiet agreement not to release them, but not necessarily to freeze them. And what we've suggested is not only should you freeze those assets, we should go a step further. We should be aware of every asset over $5 million in any banking system or financial institution that we can get our hands close to that Iran has. We should know where every dollar is so that we are in the strongest position possible to make sure that they cannot continue to do what they have done, which is to fund terrorism to the place where thousands of people die. And so freezing those assets is the first leap in the right direction from my perspective. I'm just surprised and stunned and pleasantly surprised that the administration has decided to do so, because when I say money is fungible, one of the things I like to use simple analogies that I understand. And so if you get a bucket of water, you can take a cup out of that water and you can use it for a garden, or you can take a cup out of that water and you can use it for washing your hands. You can take a cup out of that water and you can use it for bathing. Maybe a big cup of water for me. But literally, thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate that very much. Are you saying I'm large? I know you are. But anyways, but that bucket of water can be used for all kinds of purposes. But the good and bad news is the purpose of that resource is varied. Therefore, in a very similar fashion, you put a credit on a balance sheet, we know they use 90% of the money that comes to Hamas comes from Iran. So freezing the assets is going to reduce the likelihood of even a spiraling impact in the Middle East, I hope and pray. Second thing I'd say is that without any question, I think about the fact that creating a market for American lives is a terrible concept. I said this under President Obama when he paid $400 million for hostages. I said then, several years ago, this is a bad, bad precedent, period. The only thing that happens with this precedent is that the price will go higher on the heads of Americans. That means we will be less safe abroad than ever before as a result of the $6 billion being paid. And I think what we've seen now is that 30 dead Americans, there should be real consequences for that. And American hostages, likely, we don't know how many, among the 150. And what we've taught people is that there's an exchange opportunity. That imperils many lives, and it's just a very, very bad policy.
One of the other things that you have talked about in the Senate is you've supported the move by Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville to hold up some nominees for military leadership positions from going through the Senate. That's been happening on more of an ad hoc basis in some circumstances, but not in the en masse kind of way that it's been in the past. Do holdups like this hamper military leadership that could be in place right now when it might be of utmost importance?
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't be supporting it. Number one, I think his purpose for clarifying policy that's really important to our military is factually strong. Number two, I would say that the current lack of focus of our military is problematic and challenging, something that we should be very concerned with. The more unfocused our military is, the more likely we are to see flare-ups all over the place, and our military has a funding issue from my perspective. So that combination is really problematic. So the Tuberville holds, though just 2 weeks ago, Senator Schumer overrode part of it. So the benefit of the hold is to bring attention to an underlying issue. The fact of the matter is, as president, one of the things I would say is I would have a very different Department of Defense anyways, which would allow us to continue to move forward and have the kind of lethality that we need, as opposed to the splinter focus that's not in the best interest of anybody in our military. And frankly, if you think about the ultimate consequence of where we find ourselves as a country, too many people do not want to join our military right now. Our recruiting goals have been missed for the last couple of years. And part of the reason why is that people feel like our military, potential recruits feel like our military is just so unfocused that they don't want to serve. It goes back to vaccine mandates, to the abortion issues, to many, many social issues from DEI to ESG that seems to be taking up too much space, causing a lot of consternation and reducing the number of folks that want to serve in our military.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the other Republicans competing for the nomination for 2024.
I don't want to do that. Thank you very much. Appreciate your My bad. My bad.
But I would like to ask you to react to a couple of things that some of your competitors have said. Former President Donald Trump recently had some very harsh words for Prime Minister Netanyahu, saying he, quote, let us down before the 2020 strike on General Soleimani, and that Israel was not prepared for this most recent attack, that they need to step up their game, and he's also called Hezbollah smart. First, I just want to ask you, how would you assess these comments?
Terrible. I mean, anybody disagree? Let me see your hands up there. Okay, good. Yes. So, I mean, I said it before and I'll say it again. Those comments are not helpful. They are actually heading in the wrong direction. I can't be more clear that when you see your strongest ally heading into war, one of the things you need to make sure that there's no daylight. That sounds like daylight to me. So I've been pretty clear. I don't care whether you're progressive on the left or if you're isolationist on the right. The one thing we cannot have with our allies is a mixed bag. We should be loyal to our allies while being lethal to our adversaries. Anything less than that jeopardizes life. And that's all I got to say about that.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis yesterday said the U.S. shouldn't take in anyone from Gaza, calling them all anti-Semitic. What's your reaction to those comments?
Well, I don't know that they're all anti-Semitic without any question that they are Semites. But I don't think that they're all anti-Semitic. I just can't tell you who's who. And part of the challenge that we have from a refugee perspective is coming to a conclusion who's safe to bring in and who's not safe to bring in. If you cannot make that decision, and I cannot make that decision as Commander-in-Chief, I would not be able to in the midst of this conflict. So I would say we're not bringing anyone, no refugees in from Gaza, period. I think that's the right decision. Not because I think they're all anti-Semitic, but I can't tell the difference. And I do know that the majority of the Palestinians support Hamas based on all the latest polling that I've seen since 2021. So the truth is, if I can't figure out who you are, you can't come in the country. There are other candidates. Nikki Haley has come to a different decision than Ron DeSantis. She believes that it's permissible, it appears, to allow folks in. That's a moderate part of the Republican Party.
You know, she said that there is a way to ascertain.
Yeah, how?
That's what she said.
Yeah, I just want to know how. How? I told her I was going to stand up because I'm a Southern boy that wants to preach, so I got to get up every now and then. So if you see me moving around, I told her before, I can't help myself. I just can't help myself. So the truth of the matter is that when you think about these policy positions, the one thing we have to ask ourselves is, how does this impact? I'm going to do it. I can't do it. How does this? I'm sorry. I'll come right back though. How does this impact everyday Americans? How do we make sure that our nation remains the greatest nation on the God's green earth if we have no ability to discern who's coming in our country? I can't figure that out. If I can't figure that out as Commander-in-Chief, I have a responsibility to take a leap back and say, not on my watch. Our nation is just too important for me to make bad decisions under pressure because I want to be popular. That doesn't work for me. The best thing we can do, as we say in the South, is hold up, hold up, hold up until we get it right. And in my opinion, you can't get there from here. Therefore, not having any of the refugees come into our country is the right decision. And by the way, Iran has lots of room. They have lots of funds and they have a lot of culpability. Other countries can handle in the Middle East the challenges that we're seeing.
Okay, so essentially for this point in time, that's not something that the U.S. should be, in your perspective as Commander-in-Chief, the U.S. shouldn't be involved with anybody from the region. Correct.
From a refugee standpoint, correct.
Right. Okay. I want to ask you a question about some of the violence that we've seen in this country stemming out of what's been happening in Israel. An Illinois man was recently charged with a hate crime for allegedly stabbing a 6-year-old Muslim boy to death and also injuring his mother, singling him out because of his faith. What is your reaction to this that happened over the weekend?
Disgusting. It sounds like murder. Lock them up.
Okay. Succinct.
I'll give you a longer answer, okay? Here's my thought. Murder is murder. We should never find it okay for someone to kill someone because they hate them. That is not only a crime, that is immoral, it is unethical, and it cannot be celebrated for any reason in our country. And at the same time, the 71-year-old dude that killed, I can't imagine that level of hate. And I'm a guy, as you can tell, who well, not even, that was not, y'all are way too quick here. I'm a guy who comes from the Deep South. I understand racism and discrimination. I am thankful that our country has made tremendous progress in my lifetime. I really am. My 8th grade year, we had a race riot at the high school that I was going to go to the next year. And I got to tell you, seeing the venom and the hate on display in my hometown at the place where I'm going to spend the next 4 years of my life shook me. I'm a kid. I've seen hate up close, and it is disgusting. Period. Anyone who suggests that it's not, they don't belong here. At the end of the day, we should not forget the fact that over the last several months and frankly several years, we've seen the strongest increase in hate against Jewish people in our country from a religious standpoint than any other religious group in the country. So while we should see these acts of hate against Americans blindfold, it doesn't matter where you're from or who you worship, we should lock them up and throw away the key. But let's be aware from a panoramic view that the anti-Semitism that has been spreading like a cancer in our country, it is real. And it can be measured by the reports. It can be measured by the men walking in New York City who have been attacked. We can go on and see the devastation of hate. I'm just here to tell you, it should have no place in our nation. And our country should rise up. I am the lead sponsor of the anti-Semitism legislation, especially as it relates to college campuses. I'll have more legislation next week. But the fact of the matter is, I think that I should be one of the leading voices against hate because I know what it feels like. It doesn't have to be directed towards me. I should stand in the gap. We should all be willing to stand in the fire. This is a critical time in our nation. I'm going to sit back down because I'm getting ready to preach. Jennifer, just sit back down. Okay. I'm not going to take up an offering. This ain't a church. Don't worry about it. But I'm coming back in a minute because I think this is so important because one of the things that we miss in public life and in public policy and these very important conversations around the history of this country and about the history of the world, one of the things that's just so challenging is that people resort to violence as a response to their hatred for someone who's just different than they.
Well, and you've talked a lot about, anti-Semitism and concerns about that. The FBI says that they've been picking up increased threats against Jewish people in this country as well as Muslim people on both sides. So, as president, taking all of that holistically into account, what is your approach? It's not just one purported sector of society, it's perhaps multiple. How would you deal with that?
I think you deal with it the way that we've dealt with it in the past. You have to have a president who leans into the debate and leads by example. You should call out all forms of hate. Number one. Number two, you should empower the DOJ to be a system where you have the Lady Justice still wears a blindfold. Part of the challenge that we feel today is that too many people in our country feel like Lady Justice has lost her blindfold. I know that we as conservatives believe that this DOJ hunts people who are conservative, and whether you're a pro-life person or whether you're a group of parents showing up at a PTA or at a school board meeting, you're called domestic terrorists. We believe there's a problem, and at the same time, you've got others who believe that they just have lost trust in the system. One of the ways that you, as Commander-in-Chief, as President of the United States, you respond to this by leading and saying, Lady Justice, her blindfold is back. You commit a crime, you go to jail, period.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Now we have a question from a student here at Georgetown University.
Firstly, thank you, Senator Scott, for speaking with us all today. My name is Will. My question for you is this. The topic of military aid to foreign countries, notably Ukraine and Israel, has become an increasingly partisan and hot-button issue. To what extent do you believe the United States has an obligation to offer military aid to our allies, and at what point, if any, do those obligations end? Thank you.
Thank you. What was your name?
Will.
What are you studying, Will?
Government and chemistry.
I can help you with government. I can't help you with chemistry. I got a B. I'm thanking God for a B. One of the things I said is that, you mind if I stand, Will? Let me just talk to you. I can't help myself. If I want to talk to the students, if I was talking, Mo, you've seen me before. I got my shoes on. You should be happy about that. Last time I was here, y'all, I took my shoes off, and Mo was like, dude, seriously? I was like, seriously, dude, seriously, yes. Well, one of the things I'd say is that what we need is a president who specifically and clearly articulates what is America's national vital interest in whatever we do. Whether it's our foreign assistance, where it's $40 billion plus that we spend helping countries. The question is, what's the ROI? What's our return on the investment? When it comes to actual conflicts that we're seeing, i.e. Ukraine, I would say we need a president who says America's national vital interest includes degrading the Russian military, because by doing so, we keep the home front safe. And in addition to that, our NATO allies that are contiguous with either Ukraine or Russia, if it's Article 5 attack on one, it's an attack on all. So if you are like I am, you may not be, and I want to keep my troops at home and safe, if I can degrade the Russian military by using my resources and the incredibly high price of Ukrainian blood, it is a win-win-win. It's a win for Ukraine. It's a win for my NATO allies, which also means it's a win by default for my military, our military, and finally, it's a win for the homeland. Second, as it relates to Israel, what we've already done is incredibly important. What we've already done with Israel is we've had that relationship for 75 years, really. But in the last 10 or 15 years, because of the technological advances, probably 20 to 25 years, but the last 10 to 15 years, we've had this technological advancement that's allowed for us to benefit from our assistance that we're sending to Israel. We're getting it back. The same thing is true, by the way, with Ukraine. A lot of the resources that we send over there, they're using those resources, or they're coming in the form of military purchases. So we find ourselves in a strongest position where we talk about how much we're spending, but we don't talk about how much that is coming back to us, which means we're having an incomplete conversation about what it really does cost us to do A and B. Finally, if we don't figure out how to deal with our southern border, we're missing a big link in the conversation about investing in America's safety and our security, because ultimately, we've seen in the last couple of days, several from Iran have come across our border, Yemen come across our border. They're on our national security watch list. So we've got some real challenges with insecure, unsafe, and wide open borders. So we've got to deal with it all. And I do think that there's going to be another package coming forward that will give us an opportunity to weigh into some of that. But in my opinion, well, those are my answers on how we deal with making decisions. We could go back in history a little further to 1990s when, in fact, the Clinton administration talked Ukraine into giving up their nuclear weapons, with our assistance being a part of that promise.
All right, Senator, I'm going to need you back up here because
I feel like I'm being put in timeout by Meg.
Just trying to keep the conversation moving. We have
Yes,
lots
ma'am.
of student questions to get to, and our next one is coming from the University of New Hampshire.
Hello, my name is George Nigro, and I am a student at the University of New Hampshire. Senator Scott, what policies as president would you plan on implementing to further promote legal immigration into the United States?
Yeah, so I'll stay here, Meg, because you said stay here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Whatever you say, ma'am.
Thank you.
I'm here for you. So what I would say is a very quick one. But my first point on legal immigration starts with illegal immigration. Unless we close the southern border, it's going to be impossible for Congress and for me to do anything about legal immigration. However, if we were able to accomplish that goal, that objective, the next thing I would do is I'd focus my attention on legal immigration on the front door. I would say that we need to move to a meritocracy system. We have a workforce problem in our country, i.e. we have 7 million or so open jobs in our country and no one's applying for those jobs. Therefore, for us to be able to fill our jobs in this country, we're going to have a meritocracy on our immigration front. I think we'd have some kind of a formula, whether it's 60-40, 50-50, 70-30. I'm not sure what the formula should be, but we should have some that are the blue collar, the artisan contractors, the agricultural work that we need, and the other one would be the white collar or college graduate that we want to stay in the country. My theory, by the way, is a simple one. Why would I give you a visa to come to the country, get the best education you possibly could, and then go home and compete against us? If you're eligible to be here from 18 to 22 or 18 to 24, which is the highest, those are the prime time ages for threats to our country, why not keep those folks here producing a better economy if they're qualifying for the visas anyways? We may have a more stringent process without question, but at the end of the day, we're going to have to go to a merit-based system on the front door while our nation continues to age. Last point, Meg, is that between now and soon, about 8 to 10 years probably, America will have more people over 65 than under 18. We now have the smallest labor force participation rate among men, 18 to 54, than we've ever had. So the ability to generate the revenue for the government and the workforce for the future will require all of us to start having, I did the math, 5.7 kids per family. Y'all get busy. And after you graduate. So literally, we are not replacing we're not replacing ourselves. So we have a lot of work to do, or we're going to have to take a serious look on our immigration policies.
Let's go to Clemson University now for another student question.
Do they know I'm a Gamecock fan? Okay.
My name is Caitlin Vergakis, and I am a South Carolina resident and Young Women for America chapter vice president at Clemson University. What do you see as the current state of religious liberty around the world, and what would your administration's top priorities be to advance religious liberty abroad?
You know, one of the things I say thank you and congratulations on next week's win, because they had a bye this week. But one of the things I'd say is that America was founded upon the theory of religious liberty. Is embedded in the First Amendment, something that we take very seriously. And one of the reasons why people have the right to agree to disagree without being disagreeable, preferably, but certainly to disagree, is because our First Amendment provides people with a right that the vast majority of the world doesn't have, which is freedom of expression and the freedom of religion. So as President of the United States, one thing I would do is continue to encourage and promote that. You don't have to believe the way I believe. You don't have to believe at all. But one of the founding principles of who we are is the ability to believe or not and be protected in those beliefs.
Our next question comes from another student here at Georgetown University.
Senator, thanks a lot for coming to Georgetown. My name's Luke. I'm a junior in the business school.
Yes, sir.
My question is, what is your response to figures in your party such as Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, and Dan Crenshaw calling for a U.S. confrontation with Iran following the Hamas attacks on Israel? And secondly, to what extent do you think the U.S. should hold Iran responsible for these attacks?
Thank you for your question. You sure you're not a political science major? That's a really good question. I would say a couple of things. Number one, I hold Iran responsible in a very big way. Hamas carried out the attacks. They were primarily responsible, but the funders of the attack, 90% of the resources, as I said a couple times already, come from Iran, so I do hold them responsible for the attacks. I would be a little more patient with how we respond to Iran, because I'd want to make sure that Israel has a single-minded focus while we are planning and strategizing on how to deal with Iran long-term, because this is not a short-term situation with Iran. This is what they do. This is what they do with their money. We need to make sure that they don't want to do that anymore, which means that you can't appease them. You have to raise the price on them, is how we deal with them. And to say what that price should be, in my estimation, it should be on multiple fronts. One of the things I'm going to hope to do tomorrow or the next day is in May of this year, I came up with a legislation that would stop the sunsetting of sanctions on Iran. I would make those sanctions in their energy sector permanent, because we have to have them experiencing some discomfort on the economic side. And then for every American hostage that has been taken, I would tell Iran, if they don't come home, part of the price that will be paid by you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question and answer. We have another question from Georgetown University.
Hi, Senator Scott. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Caitlin, and I'm studying government and environmental studies at Georgetown. And my question for you is, do you believe the U.S. has obligations to send aid to democracies facing attacks and invasions from other non-democratic countries?
Caitlin, it's a great question. The short answer is, I think we should encourage democracy. We do not have an obligation to always support democracies. I think there's a delineation between allies and democracies. We certainly should encourage the flourishing of democracies all across this world. The more we have, the better off we are. That's been proven. The more human flourishing happens in democracies more than not. Therefore, I love when we have the chance to spread democracies, but I don't think this nation has an obligation to support every democracy on the planet.
Thank you.
We have another question from University of New Hampshire.
Hello, Senator Scott. My name is Will Marinaccio, and I'm a history and political science major at the University of New Hampshire. My question is, regarding the rising tensions in the South China Sea and the aggressive territorial claims of several countries, namely China, how might the U.S. best resolve these conflicting claims? Should it work more closely with its partners in the region, like ASEAN, conduct direct diplomatic missions with China, keep the status quo in order, or something else? Thank you.
I appreciate the multiple choice options there. Thank you very much. Brother needs all the help he can get sometimes. I do think that we should stand toe-to-toe with President Xi and make sure that he understands it's not the strength of President Xi, it's the weakness of President Biden that finds ourselves in perilous positions, number one. Number two, I would simply say that we should make sure that they stop spying on our kids, buying our farmlands, and frankly, stealing our intellectual property to compete against us. And the way that we do that is by having the kind of robust economic opportunities created here at home, so that we're focusing more on, instead of focusing on supply chain cost and price, focus on supply chain resiliency, so that we have the ability to support ourselves. If we learned anything during COVID, let it be, do not depend on China to provide us with what we know are our necessities. Depend on ourselves and or our Western alliances. I have something called Build, Not Borrow, which is my economic plan to create 10 million jobs, grow our economy at 5% by focusing on unleashing our energy resources, on innovation. And then we've lost 100,000 factories over the last 25 years. Why not start recrafting some of those factories, remaking them here at home? That could create about 4 to 5 million jobs. That is the first and best weapon that we can, a non-kinetic weapon that we have, is to make sure that our economy is as strong as humanly possible. That is a strong deterrent. Number two, what I would do with China is I would focus on their ability to use our imaginations. I mean, the definition of intellectual property is just minds and imaginations. They take what we have and they try to recreate it. They partner with our companies, a 51-49 partnership, which requires our companies to turn over our best and brightest ideas for the future to the Chinese Communist Party, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. So I would break that as well. Third thing I would do is to make sure that we continue, we still have the strongest military on the face of the earth. China is fast. They've done a great job in hypersonic weapons. They've done a great job with the next generation jets. We need to do a better job with hypersonic missile defense. If you can't see it, you can't defend it, is what the Secretary, when I was on the Armed Services Committee, that's one of the positions that he delivered to all of us. So that's really important for us to realize that. So if we're going to have an economic deterrent, become independent or interdependent on more Western allies, and then finally to be strong but growing stronger with our own military assistance. And finally, we need to focus on 3 specific areas: minerals, medicine, and microchips, if we're going to be self-sufficient.
Thank you. We have another question from Georgetown University.
Hello, Senator Scott. My name is Abby. I'm a freshman in the college studying public policy and environmental studies.
Yes, ma'am.
My question for you is, as president, how would you address inland migration due to rising sea levels displacing those in urban coastal areas?
I don't know. I was pretty funny. No, thank you. I tried my best, buddy. I tried my best. So I live in Charleston, South Carolina. If you ever want to come visit, please feel free, but please go home. Anyways, just joking. So we are about 2 inches below sea level. One of the things I've done is I'm on the banking committee, which we cover all the financial institutions and insurance. One of the things that you would imagine that would be a part of that portfolio would also include flood insurance, where we're seeing this more consistent activity. One of the things that we can do is what I have tried to do, which is pass legislation, and I would sign it as president, to stop repetitive losses. 1% of the losses in the National Flood Insurance Program, call it based on the environment or based on something else, but ultimately 1% of the losses pays out about 30% of the resources out of the National Flood Insurance Program, because we have so many people rebuilding exactly where they lost the property, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, 30 times, bunches of times. It's one of the things that we could do to actually help that. The migration patterns, by the way, I'm not sure that they're all, frankly, actually, I don't think that they are all about the environment. I think people find opportunities and they want to go live there, and they find more places desirable and they want to go live there. We've seen an incredible influx of people into well-run states like South Carolina and other states that are attracting more people because our job market is cool and our taxes are low. Quality of life is fantastic. If I sound like a billboard for Charleston, it's because I am a billboard for Charleston. So we want everybody who's smart to come to our town and make it their home. So I don't know that I would put it all on the back of one specific area, but those are a couple things that you could do. The final thing I'd say is that if you look at the result of the challenges that we're seeing within the flood markets, where you're seeing a huge influx of people, Florida is a classic example where the average homeowner insurance policy is about $1,700 nationwide. In Florida, it's $6,000 for the same policy. They have 70+% of the lawsuits in the Florida market. Part of the challenge is that it's so litigious, I think is the right word, too many lawyers down yonder causing many problems. And so that creates a powdered keg for lots of folks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We have another question from Georgetown University.
A lot of Georgetown University here.
Lots of Georgetown kids.
It's almost like this might be your alma mater or something.
Almost.
Okay.
Hi, Senator Scott. Thank you for being here.
Yes, sir.
My name's Sahil. I'm in first year in the School of Foreign Service, and I have a question about the domestic and international relations that your presidency would have with the country of India. So my first question is, under your presidency, how would the United States address rising religious tensions and Islamophobia within India? And also, how would your administration work to cooperate with India on its foreign policy goals, such as how the U.S. and India both have conflicts with China?
Yeah, so where we are in alignment, we would try to strengthen the places that we are in alignment. That would be one of the first things. But it felt like you asked a question that was a few hundred years old. In India, I mean, India and Pakistan, the relationships and the tension that comes from the religious challenges within the country are well documented for a very long time. I'm not going to pretend to have a couple 100-year answer in 30 seconds to 1 minute, although I will try. I think one of the things that we continue to do is to ask our allies who are doing business with us to adopt a significantly improved human rights challenge. When I think about that specifically, about what we're doing in something called AGOA. AGOA is an economic partnership that we have with small and typically emerging African markets, that we try to have several key components that we enumerate to be a part of the deal. I would love to see part of the trade negotiations. I would love to see that kind same template used in India and, frankly, across the world. Final thing I'd say is that BRICS, which I assume that you're, bless you, young lady, BRICS, I assume you're familiar with it, with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those economic partnerships are something that I would work to break, to be honest with you. I think it's 40% of the world's GDP or something like that. One of the goals it appears that they have is to pull the world away from having the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency. I would hope that I could woo India and other partners who have a on and off a typically healthy relationship with us. I would hope to have an economic plan that would attract more resources into the partnership with us and away from things like BRICS.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Sahil. Sahil, right?
Sahil. No worries.
Thank you.
Senator, I know this is going to shock you, but we have another question from Georgetown University.
I knew this was your alma mater. I tell you what.
It's not getting too much, Senator. First, thank you for coming here, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Zabik. I'm a senior here at Georgetown. My question for you is, with the role cryptocurrency has played in facilitating global terrorism, do you support efforts to crack down on its use, such as Senator Warren's current proposal? If not, why?
Next question. Oh, sorry. I didn't know I said that out loud. I was thinking that in my heart. Just joking. I'm going to have a good time whether you do or not. Anyways, so I do not support Elizabeth Warren's approach to almost anything, by the way. When we say her name, I just said no immediately. But there is a need for us to have, as a part of the banking process, certainty and predictability brought into the crypto world. And there are two paths that you see forward. One is I think it's the FTC. The other one is through our agricultural world. I think it's CFTC. The CFTC is led by Ranking Member Bozeman, who spent a lot of time working with a lot of firms to kind of figure out the rules of the road. One of the challenges that we have, I assume that you know this already, is that much of the consternation without regulation in America is pushing the crypto technology abroad and into foreign territory, which I think is long-term could be problematic. Particularly, I'm a fan of the blockchain technology, but there's a lot of volatility today, so it's really easy to be opposed to the crypto conversation. I've taken the approach that Cynthia Lummis on my committee has legislation that works in the direction of having some soundness brought into the world. I would rather see her approach coupled with Bozeman's approach that would provide the kind of regulatory framework that would provide stability and also credibility to what is likely, in some form or fashion, a serious part of America's financial future.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir.
Can you guess what we have next?
I cannot guess, but I'm going to say New Hampshire student.
We got one more student from Georgetown.
I love Hoyas. Go Hoyas.
Senator, thank you so much for coming with us here today. My name is Hai. I'm
Yes, sir.
a student in the Foreign Service program here at Georgetown. My question for you is, given your support for free trade, do you believe President Trump's withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, was a mistake that have allowed China to dominate the Indo-Pacific? If elected president, would you follow President Trump's isolationist approach, or would you continue with President Biden pivot towards the Indo-Pacific by strengthening ties with countries in Southeast Asia?
Oh, I love the leading part of that question. Would you follow this dude or would you follow that dude? I would just do it my own way. Let me just explain why. So one of the things about the TPP that's so important, right, is that it's 11 countries, thereabout, maybe I think 10 or 11 countries, 40% of the world's GDP as well, coming together and creating a coalition. President Trump had an allergic reaction to multilateral trade deals because he felt like it weakened our country's negotiating position. Biden, I'm not quite sure what his negotiating position is, whatever it is, I don't like it either. So what I would say is that having America lead on our terms, which was part of the notion of the TPA, the Trade Promotion Agreement, that allowed for us to set the 149 parameters that would be necessary for us to then create some kind of a path forward for trade deals. I don't have an issue with multilateral. I'm not going to say we should get back into TPP, but I would say that giving anybody other than us the prime position to dictate Japan and the Asian markets is a mistake. I don't know that we should be in that deal, but we should be a part of leading the conversation on new trade agreements that improve access to the world's market for our companies, because frankly the world has access to our market typically without significant headwinds, save the 301 tariffs during the Trump years, where we focused on hitting China for their malign behavior in multiple ways that I thought was prudent. Even though I'm a free trader, I do think that if you can't make a good deal with a bad actor, and China's just a bad actor.
Thank you, Senator.
You're welcome.
Senator, I have one final question for you. Hi, I'm still here.
Hey, Meg. How are you, ma'am?
You're running for the GOP nomination against a former president,
yes, ma'am.
A former vice president,
yes, ma'am.
A former UN ambassador.
Yes, ma'am.
How does your foreign policy experience stack up against theirs?
Actually, really well, to be honest with you. Number one, serving on the Armed Services Committee is really helpful. Number two, serving on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is really helpful. Number three, serving on the lead person on the Banking Committee for Republicans, which encompasses all of our sanctions worldwide, is really helpful. Being on the Finance Committee for the last 8 or 9 years, where we're dealing with trade deals and all the primary parts of the funding apparatus, whether it's into our budget, to our entitlement programs, all that gives me a wealth of experience that eclipses, frankly, all of them. But maybe even more importantly, having started and run businesses with my own money is infinitely more important from an executive position to make really good, tough decisions, and having had the opportunity to travel in business and in Congress, that combination puts me in the strongest position possible to understand the world far more than a few years doing this, that, or the other. I believe having the type of wealth of experience and the depth of experience and the personal wherewithal has been incredibly helpful. I'll put that against anybody, any day, anywhere.
Thank you for that answer and for answering all the questions tonight. Really appreciate your participation in this joint venture between Georgetown and the Associated Press. That concludes the second installment in our series of conversations with Republican presidential contenders. Stay tuned for the next candidate who will be taking time to talk about all these important issues with us. And thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Thank you, man.